Well, we're talking party polling tonight, but first, how about that parliamentary debate on Canada at war? Foreign Affairs Minister John Baird started it off at noon today. Not exactly a full Conservative House behind him. The Leader of the Opposition, Tom Mulcair, seemed to have most but not all of his NDP troops there when he followed just a few minutes later. Jamie, Kathleen and David are all on hand tonight. Jamie and Kathleen are in Ottawa. David is here in Toronto. Now, I'm not sure if parliamentary attendance is key on these matters, but I do wonder what consideration parties make when they decide on matters like Parliament is deciding this week, sending men and women into a combat zone. Jamie, what's the thinking behind the strategy for parties on big votes like this?
Well, I think it's the thing that drives these votes is the substantive decision that they're making. I think sometimes we get a little bit tied up in all the machinations and manipulations of political strategy, but when you're actually going to put Canada's sons and daughters into harm's way, I think you actually do it for the right reasons. At the same time, though, that you're especially with the election a year away, you are thinking about what that election is going to look like. You're thinking about what your position is going to be, and you're thinking about what your position is going to be vis-a-vis your competitors. Because, as we said lots of times, elections are about choices, and people are going to have to make a choice.
Kathleen?
It's true. I agree with Jimmy completely that dealing with the tactics around a vote like this, especially when it's an issue where you already may have soldiers abroad or you're going to have more soldiers going abroad, are very sensitive for political staffers and politicians themselves. You're considering a few things, the short-term implications, obviously making sure that your party seems to be addressing the real humanitarian and security challenges. But you also have to look at the long-term stuff. Is this actually going to be an effective combat mission? And there's a lot of pressure on both of those two points.
And you're looking at the long term of the political consequences, as Jamie concedes. I mean, nobody really wants to necessarily admit that, but there are consequences to decisions like this that go beyond the battlefield. David, what's your thinking on it?
Well, I certainly agree with Jamie that these things, these types of issues, whether to go to war, are serious enough that people start from a basis of what is the right thing to do, not what's the political thing to do. But anybody who thinks that politics is not involved in these decisions, it's terribly involved in these decisions. Look at a classic example like the United States' decision to get into the Second World War. It wasn't the existence of Adolf Hitler that caused that, Roosevelt to move against Germany. It wasn't the fact that Europe was falling. It was the fact that public opinion finally turned in the United States and allowed him to get engaged in that war. So politics is always part of it. And once you've made your decision on a basis of principle, then you need to figure out how can we hold our political coalition, which is unlikely to be unanimous on this point, together over this very difficult and personal issue.
But it's important, the point that David makes about principle and the moral judgment you need to make, because sometimes public opinion can be against your political party's decision. You look back to Layton's decision around the Afghanistan war. If you go further back, Tommy Douglas's decision, certainly around the War Measures Act, public opinion was against those two leaders. But history, I think you would say, in the long term, has proven them right. You have to make those difficult principled decisions in the moment that might not be politically popular.
You also get into situations sometimes where your own party is split, and not just split in the back rooms, but split in the front rooms. David, the Liberals had that situation back in the early 90s.
Well, in the Gulf War you're referring to, but the country's had this phenomenon throughout its history. No issue has disrupted more governments, fractured more coalitions, created more contorted structures of government than war in this country has. But you're right, one of the things you want to manage is how do you hold your party together? An instance of that was in the Gulf War debate for the first Gulf War. Former leader John Turner, who was still sitting in the caucus, had a very strong view that Canada should be supporting the Gulf War, and despite the fact that the party was officially against participation, that gave a speech to, I believe, a full House of Commons, Peter, in which he outlined his reasons why Canada should be participating. That kind of schism, tremendously unhelpful, obviously.
Yeah, well, and that's why leadership matters, right? We often discount the importance of the leadership of our political parties and those leaders' ability to actually lead, to bring people together, to explain and articulate their point of view, whether it's within their caucus, within their party, or within the public as a whole. But it's a pretty crucial component of making it through these things.
All right, I want to talk about, as part of our continuing series that we've been having with the insiders, the sort of getting ready for an election a year off now. assuming the October 19th date is still the one that is going to be respected. But polling, it's a critical part, I'm told, for all parties. At a time when polling is being questioned by many members of the public and many members of the media. So first of all, before we get to how you use it, David, as somebody who does a lot of polling yourself, give us a sense of the difference, if there is one, between party polling and public polling, the polls we see in newspapers, and the polling that you see as a party strategist. What's the difference?
Really, the methodology of how the data is collected, Peter, and then therefore what flows from that is the money and the resources that are put into it. The polls that the general public are exposed to are done by organizations pro bono, provided free of charge to media, and therefore they're done at the lowest possible cost. They may have 1 or 2 questions about the election as opposed to the 100 questions we would be asking, the political parties would be asking about people's attitudes, and they're going to be collecting this data from the cheapest online panels available or using robocalls, whereas the political parties are still using live telephone interviewer polling, which, while not as reliable as it was 20, 30 years ago, is still the gold standard in the industry, but it's expensive. So yes, the parties have much more reliable data than the general public does.
So at a time when they're being questioned elsewhere, some people don't have any faith in them anymore, parties, because of the differences you just outlined, do have faith in the polling they do.
Absolutely.
Any disagreement on that?
No, I don't have disagreement with that, but I have an amplification for it. The parties have a lot of other data sets, data points beyond just polling. So they start with the polling that David described, but for example, they can watch their fundraising numbers, right? Money speaks. So if they look at how money has been coming in, the amount of money people are giving, what's the average donation, who's it coming from, whatever, they watch for changes in that. They watch for changes in response to their members and so on. So they collect data from a whole bunch of different places and have the ability to have their researchers put all of that together to get a much more comprehensive question than one horse race question up or down asked for the newspaper.
Kathleen, you look like you want to jump in on that.
Well, yeah, just building on Jamie's point that it's not just polling. And if you look at the research overall that parties are doing, they're collecting, as Jamie said, multiple data points. That includes things like membership numbers, focus groups in terms of testing messages, what works. And so it's all of those things that you sew together to create your campaign strategy.
All right.
And maybe just one last point, Peter. Political strategists are actually better at reading that data and what it means than other people who don't do it for a living. I mean, for the political strategists like David who get that.
Journalists, right?
No. I'm just talking about, as you constantly remind me, I am now in the media, so I would not say that. But for people like David who have a much more sophisticated ability to actually understand that based on experience, depth of knowledge, etc.
All right. Well, let's plumb that depth of knowledge from David on how you use this material when you get it. That you've got faith in. Why is it important? What are you looking for? What kind of decisions does it help make?
Well, I'll let my colleagues fill out the other 4 points I would have had in this list. Let me just start with one, which is identifying where the winning coalition for you is. Who are the people that are going to elect you? And polling helps you identify those people. Let me give you a for instance. In the Ontario election, trying to figure out how the Liberal Party could get from minority to majority numbers, we identified through polling, and it wouldn't have come any other way, that a number of seats around the rim of Toronto, like Burlington and Halton, that had never been Liberal before ever, or hadn't been Liberal in 70 years, now because of demographic changes, were becoming winnable for the Liberal Party under the right conditions. And those ridings did indeed prove to be the margin of majority victory for us.
Kathleen.
Yeah, building on David, he's said you need to identify who is going to be able to vote for your party. So what part of your universe you can convince to kind of vote and lean towards and convince them to persuade them to get out and vote. But I would also add to him and say you also need to figure out where those people are. So David said that outer ring of Toronto, but you want to know where they are so you don't dedicate your resources to the wrong ridings. There's nothing like spending a full budget in a riding which you end up winning by a landslide because that money should have been put elsewhere. You're sure picking up a seat by a landslide feels great, but picking up 2, 3, 4 more seats is better.
Jamie.
Well, yeah, it's really taking that data, taking all of those data points, and then sitting down with the biggest electoral map of Canada that you can find and going riding by riding and asking, what does that mean in that riding? So, for example, one of the things that political strategists are just beginning to understand is the implication of all these new ridings that will be in play in the election next year. And who does that favor? Who does it help? Who does it hinder? How will it change the overall arithmetic of the outcome of the election?
So what are you doing a year out? I accept you're talking about those kind of issues that you're doing a year out. How does that change in the 12 months that follow? What you're looking for from your polling data?
I'll tell you, what you're looking for right now, especially, and you don't have the full year, you probably have about 6 months to do it. You're looking to find every single niggly file that is going to cause you a problem in the election and deal with it now. Clear the decks, clear the table, whatever overworked analogy you want to use, so you get all of those issues out of the way before the election comes. And polling data, public opinion data, helps you decide which ministers you have to talk to and say, you need to get onto these issues and get them off the table, because we don't want to be dealing with them when the election time comes. You don't have the full year, because as you're in the lead up to that election, people become more and more cynical about the reason you're moving on those. So that's one thing you got to do.
Well, I think that one of the things parties are doing right now is trying to nail down and isolate what their essential positioning in the campaign is going to be. And what I mean by that is, what is the ballot question that everybody wants voters to be thinking about when they're in the ballot box? Mr. Harper's, I think, is emerging pretty clearly as strong leader, strong economy. That's what he's going to put forward to people. The other parties have to decide what's their essential critique of the Harper government that they're going to put forward, and what's their essential change offering that they're going to put forward. And that will all be very data-driven as well.
Kathleen?
Well, in addition to testing messages, like David just said, in terms of back to that allocation of resources, where you're going to put your money, parties right now will be forecasting, trying to decide, are they running, growth campaigns, or are they just trying to motivate their own base and maintain or save the furniture, that kind of thing. So those decisions are being made. Just to the point that David mentioned about testing those messages, sometimes you never know what arguments are going to work on voters. I'll give you an example. In the 2011 election campaign, Layton's team had already done a vote analysis and had that information, that factoid out about Ignatieff, that he failed to show up to vote, so he didn't deserve a promotion. We had used that in the media and gotten no traction, but we decided to put it into into a focus group. It took off like wildfire, and then we knew that we could put that into our ads and really drive people to vote for us.
Fascinating, and you give us the lead into advertising, which will be the topic the next time we meet. Thanks much. We got David here in Toronto, Kathleen and Jamie in Ottawa tonight. The Insiders, as we said, will be back in a couple of weeks. The National will be back with Wendy in a couple of minutes.